Boom, and welcome back to another episode of AlphaCast. I'm Mike Winter, and I'm here, of course, as always, with Dr. Bear Paul Lando. We have an amazing guest today. Permaculture expert Levon Durr is here to share his passion to restore ecology and bring the many benefits of mushroom cultivation to mainstream awareness. Levon Durr is the owner of Fungaia Farm, a mushroom company located in the foothills of Humboldt County, California. Fungaia Farm provides mushroom spawn to home and commercial growers for food production and restoring ecology through mycoremediation. Levon strives to minimize impacts on the environment by promoting low-energy methods for growing this healthy food source. As a passionate ecologist and longtime organic farmer, Levon is certified in permaculture design and instruction, professional mushroom cultivation, and techniques of mycorestoration. How's it going today, Levon? Great to have you on, man. Really pumped for this show.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, we've got another dry day here in Humboldt County, but it's crisp and the sun's coming out.
Yeah, the weather's been a trip of late. Bear, how you doing?
Good, you guys. Hey, Levon, thanks for being with us here, buddy. So last time I saw you, how long ago was it? Maybe almost 2 years ago now?
I think so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did a great workshop for us, showed us how to inoculate logs for mushrooms, and we've still got ours going with some reishi and others, and we've got our permaculture guild started up here with some people we used to know down in Humboldt County, and your name comes up quite a bit because a lot of those people were up at our farm with your workshop and know you from down south. So I'll tell you, I'm really excited to have you here today because in the midst of the hysteria of the ongoing pandemic and orchestrated chaos, to bring in the next phase of global governance, it's nice to talk to somebody that actually knows how to fix things. And of course, what you know how to fix better than anything is the environment, and also provide good nutrition and medicine at the same time. So your message is timely, and it'll be a great break from outer world panic and basically bull crap, and talk about what's real. So good to have you on here.
Thanks, Bear.
Yeah, and Levon, maybe if you could, just for our audience, give us a little insight into how you got into this, where you come from, and really kind of how the genesis of Fungaia Farms and kind of what your mission is to date now.
Yeah, thanks. So we actually started our farm in 2011 here in Humboldt County, just outside Eureka, California. My interest in mycology sort of developed in kind of conjunction with permaculture and organic farming, seeing, how I could be more involved in my community in restoration and what we needed, around our specific ecology and our watershed. But that really started early on for me, developing skills, permaculture specifically, in how we could restore the land, how we could address some of the issues, how we could live more gently and more ecologically and regenerative, as a human. And that also led me to some Bioneers conferences where I saw Paul Stamets, who was developing his book Mycelium Running, and discussing mycoremediation and the ability of fungi to break down contaminants and pollution and different chemicals in our environment. And I was just amazed at the not only simplicity but the availability of that technology to the layman, somebody that didn't have a engineering degree, didn't have a hazardous waste license, didn't have a master's or a PhD in these technologies, that I could utilize these fungal allies to actually go out and heal landscapes in my community. And so I then, obviously did more research, started, took some of his courses, his workshops, read a lot of other books, looked at different sites that this had been successful on, and then started doing more experimentation. And then eventually, once we launched our business, was able to do a couple of projects up here in Humboldt County.
Wow. And maybe give us a little insight into some of what those projects are, because they're pretty cool.
Yeah, thanks. So the first one, we just had started our business. We didn't even have all of our facilities finished, but as we all know, these things are urgent, you know, in our community, and there's so many toxic sites and brownfield sites from industry, from, you know, the capitalistic machine that just pollutes and moves on. And one of these great mergers that happened was out in northeast corner of Humboldt County in Orleans, California, where the Mid-Climate Watershed Council had recently taken over this building downtown, right next to the post office, right next to the fire department, and they had a backup generator and a fuel storage outside. Well, the fuel tank had been leaking, and they'd had issues with the generator for years and years, and a large amount of fuel, an unknown amount of fuel, had leaked into the ground just 50, 60 yards from the Klamath River. This was also on tribal, historical tribal lands, so there was issues with removing the soil. So that was an interesting merger too. So we had a great community environmental group. We had the tribes working together, the Humboldt County working with providing some grants and funding, and this really interesting dynamic where, to remove the soil because of the archaeological significance, they couldn't actually haul the soil away without sifting all of it and looking through all of it for archaeological findings, which we did, which were there when we had to do the excavation. So doing this on-site healing and actually introducing the oyster mycelium to this contaminated soil to molecularly disassemble the hydrocarbons in situ, that we could do this right on site, allowed for amazing healing to happen, not just in the community, but also for the earth and all the organisms reliant on that landscape there.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So it's kind of legendary now that Chernobyl and other places have used mycelia to clean up radiation contamination. So if you take your project and extrapolate that, what would it take to expand what you guys did to clean up, larger regions?
Yeah, so some of the challenges, of course, there's a few patents out on this technology. That's, one of the kind of blockages of this going more more large scale. And also, but like I mentioned, it's very easy for people to do this on a small scale. We helped another landowner who had spilt some oil on her property, and it was extremely cost prohibitive for her to haul that motor oil saturated soil all the way to a hazardous waste site, in Santa Rosa or something. And she was working with some engineers, and she was looking to come into compliance with her property. And, so I helped and assisted her doing this remediation on her site there. So, small scale is very feasible. Large scale is also doable. It's working with biological elements takes things into a different mode of operation, a different time scale. We're so ready for instant gratification in our society. But that being said, even if it takes 2 years or 3 years to use biological methods, I've watched local remediation projects using chemicals take 7 or 8 years. So we think things are going to be fast. Obviously, soil removal and disposal is a very cost-effective method of putting that hazardous waste into somebody else's landfill. And in our community, that's over in a lined landfill in Redding, which is just moving it to someone else's watershed and stalling out a problem for so many hundreds of years until it's polluting their rivers or what have you. So I think we need to re-examine what our expectations are of how fast things can be cleaned up, and we need to look at the bigger picture of cost. Soil removal can often be cheaper than doing even chemical remediation or biological remediation, and so that becomes the go-to default for a lot of engineering and remediation companies.
Maybe not the best idea though, since all our topsoil is disappearing, and those of us in the permaculture movement, of course, we're learning how to grow and farm and produce good topsoil at the same time rather than deplete it. So it sounds like everything that we're involved with is about, and I know you are, about establishing local farming, so that we don't have to transport things from different areas, and also locally act to implement solutions that you're talking about to clean up our own backyard rather than counting on some big corporate entity or government to come in and do it for us. So what you're doing is invaluable, because your workshops and your website and everything you do is about traveling to different localities and teaching people like us how to do what you know how to do. One quick question. Do you have any experience in dealing with glycophosphates?
We haven't addressed that chemical specifically, but what's really great about fungal remediation is that these chemicals, basically most of the known chemicals in our environment, have been tested against different yeast and molds and fungi in a couple great books, and lots of research facilities and things have looked at the degradation of different chemicals when remediated with different molds and fungi and yeast, and so the results are there. The field testing and the actual real life implementation is kind of where the technology is at right now. Is how do we have that? How do we implement that out in real world environments where it's hot, it's cold, it's dry, it's too wet, the different soil types, different polluted landscapes. We're asking these organisms to maybe step out of their comfort zone and grow like oyster mycelium, Pleurotus ostriatus, which grows on wood. We're asking it to now break this hydrocarbon down in soil. It doesn't grow in soil, so creating the environment that it wants to grow in that, so the results are there. The technology, we know what works, but the real world application is really where we're learning about right now.
So the theory makes sense, but as you were saying, something like the mushroom that grows on wood, to get it to go into that soil medium, maybe take some amending that with wood chips or something to foster that environment so that you can then use that remediation. And really, it sounds like the backyard farmer can be some of the greater, test subjects here, and people start experimenting with this on their own, and someone like yourself helping people get into growing their own mushrooms.
Exactly. As we know, I mean, it's so overwhelming when you look at the amount of, I looked up the California's brownfield map, for Humboldt County, and there's hundreds and hundreds of dots of, just hazardous waste sites all over Humboldt County. It gets overwhelming, when you think about the scale of the damage we've done to this planet. But, just like we know in our personal lives, you've got to do something. It's healing psychically for us. It's healing for the earth. It's healing for the ecology, our community, our watershed. So, even on a small scale, even if it's a couple garbage cans of polluted, diesel saturated soil because somebody spilled something, we all have these, problems. We all have these impacts on our properties. We all use hydrocarbons. We spill chemicals. I'm guilty of it. So having these tools are a great resource for homesteaders, for community activists.
Yeah, and in the general population in the future, hopefully, if we can use their own tools against them in terms of the capitalistic markets and find ways to create business opportunities for folks seeking that, where they can create their own mushroom business, where they can go. I could see this, visualize this being the new remediation service, and even cities where you have your local mushroom remediation company come to clean up a spill in a much more holistic and even more affordable way.
Yeah, exactly. And what's so synergetic about what you just said too is that a lot of these medicinal mushrooms that are so powerful and such great allies for our health, our immune system, that they also are great remediators in the environment. So for instance, turkey tail, I'm not sure which variety of fungus would be best for glycophosphate, but turkey tail is like a big hitter for a lot of like really, really toxic chemicals, old dry cleaning chemicals, all kinds of, super cancer causing chemicals that we've used all, throughout our history in our environment, in our communities. And oyster mycelium, amazing hydrocarbon remediator. So these go hand in hand, and that was kind of the impetus of setting up our business. Is once you have the ability to produce the spawn for food, a lot of these go hand in hand with remediation.
Amazing. That's good.
And
That's
makes
go ahead. I was just going to say my kids love chewing on turkey tail on the trail, so it's a good thing. Go ahead, Pear.
And it's perfect sense what you're saying, Levon, because I practice bioterrain medicine, and the principles of bioterrain medicine is you don't treat disease, you treat the body, and the body is considered an ecosystem. And no different than when you are farming, you want good soil, otherwise nothing else works. And so we look at the soil of the body, and in fact, we even have certain laboratory assessments and other techniques that we use for both farming, the same exact science for both farming, soil science, and health. And so if you understand that, and then what you're saying about mushrooms seem to be good for the external ecosystem and even for us, well, yeah, it's kind of a no-brainer if you really understand that biology all follows the same principles. It works the same way. And if doctors, for instance, started understanding what good organic farmers understand, then people would be a lot healthier too. So since we're talking about that, and I'm more interested also in anything else you have to share about its application to fixing our external ecology. But whenever you're ready to maybe talk about what you know about effects of mycelium on the body. And I know you have some tinctures. I don't know if those are herbal or mushroom tinctures, but anything you want to share along that line?
Yeah. Thanks, Bear. What's so interesting, I think, which isn't real predominant in our society, maybe more so in Asia or whatever, but we really, just like plants are such incredible allies, fungi are these amazing ecosystem restorers, these amazing healers. The compounds they process and that they assimilate into their fruiting bodies, into their mycelium, are such incredible healers in our own bodies. And so I think the synergistic understanding that people are starting to grasp more and more is these allies that these organisms are to us. They're striving for ecological balance. Why does oyster mycelium break hydrocarbons down? What an interesting phenomenon. This mushroom eats wood. It grows on alders and oaks. Why would it break these hydrocarbons down? Okay, on a scientific level, you could say it's looking for the carbohydrate. It's molecularly disassembling the hydrocarbons. You end up with base salts, gases, and oh, yum, a carbohydrate, a sugar, and it eats the sugar. You could just say, oh, it's just roaming around the environment for millions and millions of years looking for sugar, just like we are. But you step back on a more broader ecological sense of symbiotic relationships, and you see that mycelium is striving for more ecological abundance and ecological balance. And of course, there's parasitic fungus, and there's fungus that attack, our bodies, and there's fungus that attacks insects, and and ruptures out of their heads. Of course, there's like aggressive strains and things like that, but on a grander scale, over millenniums, you see that what are these organisms striving for? They're breaking down really, really intense bonds of cellulose and lignins, releasing nutrients into the environment for smaller organisms, for bacteria, for soil organisms, worms, bugs, and that is then creating soil, and that is then creating more growth on the planet, more trees, more biomass, in a sense, for the fungus to eat more food. So when I look at it on that sense, on the grand scale of time, that these fungi were some of the first land colonizers, some of the largest organisms after the volcanic era to colonize the land, to build soils, to build these ecological communities, you realize, wow, that's something that I can also embrace and take part of and encourage, whether it's on my own property or my own land or my own community or in a remediation project, that these organisms want that to happen just as much as I want that to happen. They're striving for more ecological abundance, which benefits me and so many other organisms.
So in some circles, there's a lot that's said about mushrooms having a network, so to speak, like a mushroom internet that, like Mike, you were talking about before we went on, and just this web of consciousness and communication. And that I'm convinced that herbals, especially mycelium herbals, with my experience in medicine, convey data, they convey information. It's not just about chemistry. Have you dabbled in those areas at all?
Just reading like all the great research that's coming out, and our understanding that, trees are communicating with each other, mycelium's communicating with the trees, the mycelium's communicating with other mycelium, this idea, this internet of exchange. Some great research that just came out in the last couple of years was watching the mycelium basically do this stock market exchange with different trees. It was willing to bargain with especially mycorrhizal mycelium, where it's fused together with the roots of the trees, expanding its ability to absorb minerals and nutrients and water from much farther than the root zone. And then they start finding out that the mycelium, that once a tree has enough, say some mineral that it's looking for, the mycelium will start doing exchange with other trees and actually start bargaining and be like, oh, well, will you give me some carbohydrates? I'll trade with you this much sugar, this much, nutrients and minerals. And this whole underground relationship that's happening is just, we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah. We like to talk a lot about that on our podcast. And, there's, we know the heteropolysaccharides and the beta-glucans and all the things that help our body's immune system that mushrooms provide. I'm convinced that the real efficacy of herbals is the information they provide. And again, taking the understanding that our body's a microcosm, and that that microcosm is dependent on microorganisms, especially, just like, when you're farming, it's all about the microorganisms in the soil if you want to have successful farming. And we learned the same thing in medicine. So, mushrooms, I believe, are providing good chemical constituents, but more important, they're conveying information and kind of organizing the troops in there. And like you said, I really like the way you put it. Just seem to have this intent, to fix things and to, reestablish the natural order. And, as far as rehabilitating ecosystems, 3-4 years is nothing in the scheme of things. We've been on this new farm here going into our 4th year, and just what we do with our own efforts, it's amazing what you see happening if you keep at it. But it's because you're working with nature, and so you put in just a little bit of effort and nature gives back 1,000-fold. And sometimes you just can't believe, from year to year, how much things transform. And then, of course, we can also look at the past civilizations that have come and gone, and that they're discovering through archaeological digs and vast cities and technologies, and once they stop being, inhabited, it was just a matter of a few short years before nature overcome everything. And now you don't even know they were there in the first place. So yeah. Nature is the last resort. And some of us are thankfully just starting to figure out that that's where we need to go to. So, so what, tell me a little bit, unless you have other things to talk about, tell me a little bit about your tinctures and the things that you're producing. And are they things that you're growing yourself on your land?
Yeah. As a small business, we're, looking at the economics of scale, and what we can do and produce to survive, financially, on a small scale with minimal automation, and looking at our energy inputs and our carbon footprint as a business. So we've explored all kinds of things, from dried mushroom products to we sell spawn, teach classes, provide grain spawn, plug spawn for commercial and home growers, cultivators. But one of the interesting aspects of medicinal mushrooms is it lends itself to a more shelf stable product. And a lot of mushrooms are real perishable. Getting them to market, getting them into the hands of chefs and cooks and homes as fast as possible, so that the nutrient value is the highest, which is why we need small mushroom producers spread out throughout our communities. But that being said, we live in a world of globalization where stuff gets flown in immediately, and I have to compete with that price point. So we do some fresh mushrooms, mostly oyster mushrooms. But as we kind of advanced our cultivation techniques and were able to expand into other things like lion's mane and turkey tails and reishi, we started drying more of those. And luckily we had an ethanol producer, a Humboldt distillery in Humboldt County, so we could get 190 proof fully organic ethanol. And so we decided to launch a tincture line. Right now we have 2, and we're going to come out with a 3rd one, our turkey tails, in the next couple months. But we're doing an immune tonic with shiitake and 2 different reishi mushrooms, Ganoderma lucidum and the Ganoderma tsugai. And then we're doing a pure lion's mane. And it's really exciting too, to bring that to community and have people that with health issues that are using it and finding benefit from it, and provide that locally. Right now we're using strictly just fruiting bodies of the mushrooms. So we're just harvesting the reishi fruiting bodies and the lion's manes and shiitakes. We are going to start growing pure mycelium. One of the interesting conundrums in the mycology business right now, which is mostly being perpetuated by real large companies, is it's a lot easier to grow the mycelium on grain and then just dehydrate and powder the grain. So mostly what people have access to is myceliated brown rice or myceliated sorghum. Great medicine, has all kinds of beneficial compounds in it, of course, but they're inevitably diluted by the brown rice. So one of the advantages of fruiting bodies is we know that it's 100% mushrooms. That being said, specifically, Paul Stamets and his line of mushroom supplements, he's been doing a lot of great studies on what compounds are in the mycelium that are either not as predominant or not available in the fruiting bodies. And from what I've read so far, both are true a little bit in both directions. So when the mycelium fruits and creates the mushroom, the fruiting body, you do have, it does produce some higher compounds that aren't found in the mycelium. But that is also true of the reverse. When the fungi are in this vegetative reproductive phase of growing just pure mycelium, it produces certain compounds are more predominant in that vegetative phase. So what we're researching right now is how we can produce pure mycelium without the grain additive. Yes, there's some of the grain is assimilated and turned into mycelium, but inevitably you're ending up with a large amount of filler of brown rice or sorghum. And so my experience with that has been that people often find they need to take a lot higher dosage to get the real true strong, powerful medicinal effects of the mushrooms.
Yeah, that's all great, because I have a lot of questions about that, because a lot of, we have mushrooms in some of our products, and, we have some good trusted suppliers, and we're going to be talking to you more about that too. But a lot of them now, like for instance, cordyceps, which is kind of hard to get a hold of out in the wild, it's all this grain produced. So my first question when I saw the medium and everything they're using is, okay, how potent is that? And I don't have a way to test that directly myself. It's just kind of trial and error sort of thing. So that's all valuable information. What about, when you're doing extracts, I read differing things too. Some people say the polysaccharides can be damaged by alcohol, and some people say do dual extraction, or then other people say, no, that's not the case. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, the chitins in the mushroom, specifically the fruiting bodies, and very much so the mycelium too. Actually, they're very, very hard to break down. That's why mushrooms need to be cooked so thoroughly before we can digest them. And the same goes true for taking it medicinally. And so what the research I've seen so far that's out there is that there's alcohol soluble compounds and there's water soluble compounds. And so the mycelium, the other issue with just taking the mycelium itself is that you're basically taking what would be also in the same category as water soluble compound. It's heat. You've heated the tissue of the mycelium and you've broken it down, and now it's more bioavailable for you. But that being said, there's some heat / water soluble compounds, whether you boil the mushrooms or you heat the mycelium and then powder it, which is what you're getting in a myceliated grain product, is they cook the grain and dehydrate it and then powder it. And so you're missing some of the alcohol soluble compounds in that process. And so what's interesting is when I first started researching this 15 years ago, I was in the herb store and I saw a gentleman that was in this giant, Harley Davidson jacket, these two motorcycle Harley guys, and he was in the herb store and he was buying all the reishi they had there, all the dried reishi, just pounds and pounds of dried reishi. And I couldn't help myself. I'm starting a mushroom business. I'm interested in medicinal mushrooms. And I asked him, well, what are you going to do with that? And the herbalist had minutes before offered him a tincture. And he said, oh, the tinctures don't work. And I couldn't help myself. And I said, oh, excuse me, sir. It was a little intimidating, the tattoos. And he's 6'5", big husky guy. And he goes, I make the tea. I have hepatitis. All my friends are dead. The doctors can't believe I'm still alive. It was just a little out of character in the middle of, this little hippie town in this herb store. There's this, big Harley Davidson guy. And I was just like, wow, that's so interesting. I wonder why he was so against the tincture. So I go home, I get out every book I have, I read every blog I can find. I end up on this Chinese doctor's website who started he started testing the alcohol soluble compounds and the water soluble compounds that you could get out of the mushrooms, the fruiting bodies. And sure enough, when you looked at the water soluble extracts, those are attributed to dealing with viruses, and specifically the hepatitis that this gentleman had. And I was like, wow, but on the other side of the column, the alcohol soluble compounds were known to address different immune and immunological problems. And so this was kind of the first, this was like the first information I'd started seeing on what you call double extraction, which is, heat or boiling, and also, ethanol extractions. And so what his argument was made on this Chinese doctor's website was, there's no reason to not be doing both just because you're trying to address a virus. Wouldn't you also want the alcohol soluble compounds to address your immune system that also, could use help in other ways that's maybe struggling with this virus, as you get these other nutrients and, like you mentioned, beta glucans and minerals and proteins out of the water extraction. So that was a real kind of door opening for me, and why people had gravitated towards different extractions for years and found that they worked, water versus alcohol. And so now the general school of thought amongst a lot of the holistic community is doing the double extraction.
So does the water soluble elements, are they at all harmed by alcohol after the fact if you combine them, do you know?
Not from what I've read. That's definitely an interesting question. The compounds do seem very stubborn to get out of a mushroom, like we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
It's very dense. I mean, when you take these reishi, we soak them in alcohol for months, and then we squeeze the mushrooms out, and then we boil the mushrooms, and then we add the water and the alcohol together. So we can take that 190 proof, and we can add, we use reversed osmosis water, and then we boil the mushrooms, and then we add them together, bringing the alcohol content, down to a safe level for you to just, drop in your mouth or put in a tea. So we haven't, had our specific tincture tested for what compounds are in there. We're more going off of what other people have shown. And I have a great, one of my favorite books, The Fungal Pharmacy. They have some of the most comprehensive analysis of different extraction methods and what was able to be extracted from the mushroom using mycelium or hot water or alcohol or all three.
Yeah. And what the way I learned primarily in years of clinical medicine is what works.
Right.
Exactly. I didn't have a chemical lab, but you see people day after day, 30 people's a day for decades. And it's like, oh yeah, that works. And you just like your friend in the health food store there, the biker, he knew what works just from experience. And that's the best way, because you can get all sorts of laboratory tests and things. And on the real ground, I found that it doesn't always work that way when you're dealing with real people's bodies. So this is a great segue right into the hysteria at present, which is the coronavirus. And I'm seeing some good evidence that chaga mushroom in particular seems to really inhibit the viral replication and that sort of thing. So anything you can share with that?
Mushrooms are they're way underappreciated, especially in our society. here in the U.S. You know, it's so interesting to see, you know, these diffused health claims, you know, on the CDC's website and on social media and stuff, where people are, you know, garlic won't cure the virus, and you know, don't drink bleach, and you know, all these different things where no one's even remotely mentioning. It's like, well, could you get a doctor to admit that, you know, a Big Mac and some French fries definitely won't help, you know, your virus and your immune system. So we know, even in mainstream society, that, you know, healthy fruits and vegetables and a good diet, you know, makes you stronger and makes you healthier. But we're not willing to make that leap to plants and fungal medicine in the mainstream, and understand that you know, that yes, rich minerals and rich different, you know, like you said, the message that these plants and fungal allies have for our bodies, what they give us, we've been using this for millenniums, you know, as humans.
I mean, it really is alchemy in a way.
Yes. You know, when they thawed the Iceman, you know, up in the Arctic, you know, he had the chunks of the polypore mushroom on him, you know, and people are like, oh, what was he using it for? It's like, okay, well, take your pick. It's medicinal. It clots blood, and it's a great fire starter. You know, it's just like, oh, well, we've known this, you know, for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, and something real quick on the more microbiology tip and stuff that Bear and I cover, and this is controversial in some respects, but on the idea of pleomorphism, that there have been some amazing minds that have actually been able, under dark field microscopes, to see bacteria turn into fungi. So that gets crazy, and that makes a lot of sense in terms of what we kind of understand what a virus is, which is, and this goes down a whole other subject line, but the interaction between fungi and bacteria and quote unquote viruses has been documented, and it's really been kind of put under, you know, constraints of current scientific concepts. But we're starting to see that things like chaga, reishi, et cetera, obviously have this effect, and there's something else going on than the mainstream science is willing to say or knows yet. And obviously we need a lot more research, but as Bear says, people that are sick and have these issues and take this stuff, the Chinese medicine has known this for thousands of years. They see it working. So there's something there. And on the chaga tip, which I just ordered 50 pounds more chaga from our place, Mountain Rose or whatever the place is. Yeah.
You're one of those hoarders, Michael.
Well, I put it in my coffee every morning, and that was a couple questions I was going to ask you, Levon, about as far as chaga, like what's the best methods for a person like me to get in my system, because I love it. I think it's great with coffee. Do you buy it in chunks? You buy it pre-ground, whatever? What's the best way to keep it, you know, when you're buying bulk like that? But two, it seems like chaga is only found on birch in the wild. Have you been able to figure out ways to actually you know, grow it on a farm?
Right. We have not attempted to grow it ourselves. I did have a employee that was doing some research on chaga, and it does seem that the growth that it produces on trees is very adaptable and will grow on a wide variety of different trees. But they were finding, or at least he was explaining to me, some of the research that he was seeing was that when you mentioned the birch tree, that some of the more higher medicinal compounds are produced when it's specifically grown on birch. So that's something for people to watch out for. Is there's a lot of knockoff chaga that that, you know, me and my worker were kind of discussing the concern about people getting lower grades that doesn't have as much medicinal compounds.
And that's true for a lot of medicinal mushrooms, is know where you're getting them from.
Know your source, and just because it can be grown very cheaply, you know, in another country, or unorganically or whatever. We're talking about medicine here, so not only the energetic, body of the medicine, the herbs or mushrooms that you're taking, but also the nutrient value and the chemicals that might come along with it.
So in your expertise, how would you say would be for an average Joe like me? What's the, to get chaga into your system? What are some ways to recommend besides making your own tinctures or buying tinctures? I mean, like for instance, I grind it up and put it in coffee. I also get the pre-grind stuff. As far as extracting it and to get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah. Well, as we discussed, I mean, your tea, you're basically doing a hot water application. So that, that's great. That's totally sufficient. Something, these very dense polypore mushrooms and things like chaga and stuff, the more you can boil it, the better. So just, mixing it in the tea is probably sufficient with hot water, but, especially if you have bigger chunks that you're putting into, a tea or making some kind of broth or something out of, I would definitely boil it, for longer, for like an hour or something to get your money's worth. And then of course, go ahead.
So go ahead, you finish.
Oh, and then as we mentioned, there could be some compounds that might be more alcohol soluble. I haven't looked at chaga specifically, but from what I've looked at with reishi and stuff, that you could be missing out on a few other compounds that might be more alcohol soluble.
So obviously, the finer you grind it, it's gonna be amenable to extraction a lot easier. What we do, we have a product I'll plug. We have a chaga coffee,
Mm-hmm.
and what we do is put so many grams of whole chaga chunks in with the coffee beans, and then have a commercial grinder, burr grinder, and it all comes out the same, particle size. And so that's the way we do it. So people just brew up the coffee, they get the chaga in there and some other things as well. But
can I
that's
ask
a good way to do it for coffee drinkers.
A question, Bear, too, on this tip, because
yeah,
we take that coffee and we blend it with coconut oil because we know the lipid delivery system allows for more cellular. So I'm wondering if doing that with the chaga, Levon, with integrating it into a lipid fat for a delivery system into your cellular matrix, if that maybe adds a different element of delivery. I don't know if anyone's done research on that.
Yeah, I haven't read anything specifically on that, but from what I know, like you mentioned about, fat deliveries, I mean, that's so important for us to constantly have those in our diet. And just to go back to the, chaga coffee for a minute, obviously, if you're doing a quick brew like that, then yes, the finer the powder, the better for sure. That would be the best way to get the extraction is, to have it in a finer powder.
And the liposome delivery really does work for everything else. I don't know why it wouldn't work for the chaga.
Right.
And we know that when we do blend it with fats, like the bulletproof method, it works for all the other herbs, and I'm sure it works for chaga the same way.
Yeah.
So God, great discussion. I don't know where to go. There's so many questions I have. So go ahead.
People in the chat have questions.
Oh, good, good.
Well, I mean, the main people are really excited about starting to grow their own mushrooms and starting to either start this as a business or just for their own personal uses. So maybe, Levon, we could give some tips on ways that your average, home gardener can get into this, because it can seem quite daunting to those who are more of a traditional, like myself. I understand how to start from seed, anything, but mushrooms are a whole different animal.
Yeah.
So, and we know there's massive benefits to having mushrooms in your greenhouse, for example, providing more carbon dioxide to your plant. There's a symbiotic relationship there. Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming we're going to talk about bags here, but, we've plugged logs in that workshop. But I think that would be great to give some people some practical advice on how they can get into growing their own mushrooms, cultivating their own mushrooms. And then depending on where you are, what do you recommend as far as types of mushrooms to grow, as far as the easiest ones to grow and with the most impactful kind of benefits to, let's say, a home gardener?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, kind of like using the oyster mushroom for the mycoremediation, they're also one of the most user-friendly mushrooms to cultivate. They have what's called one of the highest BEs, biological efficiencies. So they'll produce, you know, a weight-to-weight ratio of, often you'll have 10 pounds of substrate and you might get 10 plus pounds of oyster mushrooms. So, which is also why they're cheaper at the market, you know, because they're easier to grow. But they're super good for you, super delicious, really productive, some of the fastest turnaround of inoculation to getting your food. They're you know, they're not too bad dried and rehydrated. They make great powders, tons of great medicinal benefits, full of protein, really good for cholesterol and all kinds of vitamins that they have in them. We grow oyster mushrooms specifically by using pasteurized straw. So we get local, we source wheat straw and we grind it up. We put it through the leaf mulcher. You could use, people use weed whackers, lawn mowers, and then without the option of shredding the straw, you can also just use the straw straight up. But we do a quick 1 hour pasteurization in hot water. You can use steam, you can boil the water. We use an on-demand hot water heater and we pasteurize the straw for 1 hour. And what that does, it basically just sets the whatever molds and bacteria are on the straw. It sets them into a dormant state. It just shocks them. It doesn't sterilize the substrate, but it sets the other competitors back just enough that once we cool the straw and inoculate it with our grain spawn, it can overwhelm the substrate fast enough, and this specifically only works with oyster mushrooms. It can overwhelm the substrate fast enough that they're not actually able to germinate and colonize and grow any kind of molds or anything on the straw. And as long as the mycelium is dominating that substrate, it secretes antibodies and it literally like encapsulates any competitors, and it's very territorial. This is my substrate. You're not even going to be able to germinate or grow on this until I'm done with it. Wow. And so it's a great turnaround. It's a great way to produce large amounts of protein in a very fast manner. It has a much lower carbon footprint than sterilization, which is traditionally used for sawdust production, like on you know, shiitake production specifically, to use that for an example. So it's much more of a lower ecological footprint. There's been lots of discussions of using oyster mushrooms in disaster areas where people need food fast, and what can we, you know, what other protein could we produce in a matter of you know, weeks, you know, 3 weeks, a month, besides growing, you know, crickets or grasshoppers or something. You know, there's not a lot of other proteins that we can produce that fast for people. And so we grow a lot of oyster mushrooms. That's a great introductory way. Oyster mushrooms are so forgiving that people can even take the stems of oyster mushrooms that they find in the wild or at the store and just wrap them in wet cardboard and start growing their own spawn, and pour some hot water over some straw, add some old coffee grounds. Just, it's one of the funnest, user-friendly, easiest mushrooms to goof around with and grow at home.
Amazing. This is great. And you guys sell spore starter packs and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. So what we provide is we use organic wheat berries, and we grow the mycelium on sterilized organic wheat berries. And that way you can take like 4 pounds of organic, you know, spawn, and you can inoculate, you know, about a half a bale of straw, which will grow you tens of pounds of oyster mushrooms for the next 3 or 4 months.
Fantastic.
So you provide the spores and everything in your shop?
Yeah, we specifically just grow the spawn. And so just the mycelium is what we're providing people. We do.
So people could go to your website and get everything they need, basically?
Yep.
Yeah, I
Yep.
just dropped the link in the chat, and we'll have the link to Fungaia Farm in the show notes as well, so that
Thanks,
people
Mike.
can get that. And then for our Patreon subscribers, Levon's going to be nice enough to hang out real quick. And Levon, I think for our Patreon subscribers and the co-op here, maybe we could do a little quick reishi, quick workshop and explain to people how they can grow their own reishi and grow their own medicine. So that'll be on our Patreon. If you'd like to go subscribe to our Patreon, you can join the co-op. That's $15 a month, but you get discounts on our products and you get some other resources and stuff. But you can also just join our general Patreon, support the show here for $5, and you get exclusive access to content like that. So Levon, if you could hang out for a second after the show and we could do a quick 5-10 minute workshop on growing reishi mushroom, I think that would be really cool.
Sounds good.
Amazing. So yeah, Fungaia Farm. I dropped it in the chat here.com. You can get that those products there under the shop section. And they've got the grain spawn, plug spawn, etc., tools and wax. As far as then bags and stuff, just like what do you recommend? Just plastic bags or?
Yeah. Buckets and totes are one of the easiest things to use for more small scale growers. There's cost issues with the turnover and the amount of buckets. We do buckets also, but yeah, plastic, it's disposable. It creates pollution, but there's also the economy, the economics of cleaning the buckets on a larger scale that we're confronted with. So using buckets specifically for full production is a little bit challenging for us. So we do use some plastic tubing to stuff the straw in and grow the mushrooms out of that also.
And so for me, for like my greenhouse, if I wanted to get going on this, what concerns do I have in terms of humidity, temperature, stuff like that?
Yeah, so most all the mushrooms that you're going to want to grow besides the reishi really are going to be more user friendly in the early spring and late fall when your greenhouse isn't getting temperatures above 75, 80.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a great time to utilize the greenhouse when it's not being used that much, or you have some getting started in early April or May. That's a great opportunity where you have that, high humidity that a greenhouse provides. You're looking for 80% humidity, 90% humidity. That could also be achieved by, creating another little microclimate within the greenhouse with some other greenhouse plastic or some kind of sheeting or something where you create another little humidity chamber within a greenhouse. But often in our coastal environments, in the Pacific Northwest, we do have pretty high humidity and these perfect temperatures for greenhouse or even outdoor fruiting in March and April and October and November.
Very cool. Interesting. And do you know, as far as the humidity, actual levels and stuff that you're targeting in terms of numbers?
Yeah, so we're looking for temperatures around, most, to make some generalizations, again, we can get into reishi, which is more specific, but most of your edibles, shiitakes and oysters and lion's mane and namako and things like that, everything's going to produce, prefer like high humidities in the 80 to 90%. And temperatures, most things are pretty, malleable. They'll grow slower at colder temperatures. They won't really handle really hot temperatures over 75. Some things might be able to be okay with 80 here and there during the day every once in a while. And then there's the cutoff for cool, for on the other end is really you need to have nighttime temperatures above 45, 50 to get any kind of growth to happen.
Very cool. Yeah, you see it. Obviously, the wild mushrooms,
Exactly.
just they grow with spring and fall, or is like the target time, and we are fortunate enough to where we live in the lower Pacific Northwest, what I call it here, on the border here of California and Oregon. We live in mushroom paradise, really. What are some of your favorite wild mushrooms to forage, and what do you have down there in Humboldt that you like?
Yeah, that really was sort of my introductory into mycology, was chanterelles. A friend of mine taught me how to find them. Restaurants were buying them, and I was able to pay my rent. you know, and that led me to mushrooms demystified, and reading David Aurora's book, and learning about other mushrooms, and of course my obsession with wild foods and plants has mostly been around what I could eat. I've expanded that in my older age to start to encompass and learn about other roles that mushrooms play, and things that aren't necessarily edible, but also just beautiful and play an incredible ecological role in our environment. But yeah, I really I love black trumpets, Craterellus, California copetus, chanterelles, obviously, lion's mane, so fun to find in the wild. We do grow it, here for our tinctures and to eat. But it's such a joy. It's such a fun surprise to find a lion's mane. They're a little more sneaky, a little more rare, than lots of
Where, in your experience, do you typically find a lion's mane in terms of in the forest?
Yeah, primarily in oak forests. It loves to grow on rotten sections of live trees. So I'll find witch's beard, different hericiums, on hollowed out trunks. Sometimes too high up to reach, unfortunately, on dead branches, white oaks and black oaks primarily.
And very cool. I'm taking notes. In fact, I've got my Mushrooms of the Pacific Northwest guidebook here, of course, by Steve Treadell and Joe Amirati.
Excellent.
Great field guidebook. It's got amazing pictures, all color pictures. And living here, I've really caught the mushroom foraging bug, and black trumpets is a favorite of mine. And I a lot of lobsters up here, but always, and of course, turkey tail, artist conchs, that stuff. But it's such a fascinating hobby, and really, and the kids love it. It makes going into the forest a lot of fun because it's like a treasure hunt, and then you're getting in touch. I think it's amazing for children getting into this hobby, and there's a lot of fear that you can die or get really sick. But what we found through my research is that's actually very rare. You have to really be kind of stupid to succumb to that. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about foraging. But also on the other side, it's kind of interesting because I do have friends that go and they forage and they have a business out of it. And it's like, it's crazy. You're going into these forests and you're getting free, essentially, food by foraging. And I guess there is some kind of concerns there in terms, and I think in Washington, they're starting to limit ability of foraging because of over foraging. And also people that aren't educated in terms of how to forage. Maybe if you could explain really quick, what are the best methodologies and just general ethics of foraging mushrooms?
Definitely. Yeah, obviously there's a lot of us humans on this planet now, and we have put a huge stress on all kinds of different wild foods, ginsengs and golden seals and Oregon grape and all kinds of things, and the same's true with mushrooms and seaweeds and different things. And as the environment becomes more stressed too, and we look for these healers and these allies out in nature, it's good to have that awareness. On a biology standpoint, a fruiting body is called a fruiting body because it literally is the apple on the tree. It literally is, you're just picking an apple. So what we see is when people start talking about over harvesting, there's been some pretty decent studies that have refuted the idea that you can over harvest apples or mushrooms. That being said, as more of an ecologist, whenever I'm harvesting, be it nettles or acorns or chanterelles, I don't take everything from the ecosystem. There's other animals, there's other organisms, there's other insects dependent upon these foods. Even if it's just a banana slug, they play a super important role in the ecosystem. And so that to me is over harvesting. And so it's important to leave some berries for the bears, and it's important to leave some nettles for all the other insects and herbivores that also like to enjoy nettles. And the same is true with wild mushrooms.
In terms of actually picking the mushrooms too, I've learned that you want to cut the fruiting body at the stalk but not rip it out. This helps the mycelium network, correct?
There's some validity to that, but again, you're talking about a microscopic amount of mycelium that's disturbed when the organism, the apple tree itself is massive underground and living symbiotically with that oak tree or that spruce tree or whatever, or the huckleberry. So it's kind of like you picked the apple and a little bit of a branch came off with it. So again, that's not having a big impact. But I like to think that, just like seaweed releases, spores in the ocean, and you don't want to pick all the seaweed, mushrooms release spores. My personal philosophy is when I'm out harvesting whatever wild foods they are, you leave the big grandmother chanterelle to spore into the environment. People have done these studies and picked the mushrooms over and over again. And yes, as soon as you see the fruiting body of most varieties of fungi, they're already releasing spores. But I think we can all admit that as the mushroom gets bigger, it's releasing more spores. The longer it stays there, it's releasing more spores. People have also made the argument that humans can be part of the ecology, and as we pick the mushrooms, we do become spore dispersal organisms also.
That's a great point. That's the whole point of fruiting bodies being delectable.
Exactly.
So that mammals and other animals take them, and the seeds get, the birds get the seeds and drop them, and the squirrels,
Exactly.
There's some really cool study showing of squirrels I've been watching lately and how they proliferate forests.
Yes.
And truffles. That's a great point you make, because people are part of the natural ecology. And there seems to be a movement underfoot these days that, people are evil and we're, the problem and everything. And well, no, not really. It's just we have to learn how to act responsibly, just like all the other mammals in the forest. And we can all coexist and be symbiotic at the same time. Yes. So great points. Great. Wow, this has been such a great talk. I really want to get you up to our place again, and Deb will probably be giving you a call there, and if you're open to doing another workshop up here, because we've got a lot more people this time around now that our permaculture guild is really caught on, and yes. We're having regular meetings and they're growing all the time, so it's really heartening because there's a great interest in all this. So love to have you back up here.
Great.
Yeah, it is really cool how the whole mushroom thing is really on, thanks to Stamets. And are you familiar with the fantastic Fungi movie that's coming out? We have a friend, Judy, who's in the permaculture group, who's spearheaded the film up in Brookings here. And I know it's in 13 days. They're having a nationwide release celebrating it, the Fantastic Fungi Day, they're calling it, on March 26th. and the movie's going to show across the country. Are you aware of this, Levon?
Yeah, I'll be at the showing here in Arcata. They're doing it at the D Street Arcata Community Center. I think it's 6 o'clock. It's up on Facebook and on our email. Yeah, I'll be there with my tinctures and spice mixes, and I think there's going to be a little after the movie discussion too.
Fantastic. I'm showing the on this for those watching the video here, the website. It's fantasticfungi.com, and you can go to there and you can go to the actual showings, and they are everywhere from Hawaii, Washington, Florida. I mean, in every state it looks like.
Yeah.
So this is really cool, and I've been meaning to read the book, actually, that the movie's based on. But this is really exciting that this is really getting into the mass consciousness right now, and I think it's time. It's time that we woke up to the power of what these amazing little guys can do for us.
Definitely. And Mike, just to go back to harvesting for one more point, when you said to cut the stalk off, that is a practice that I do with most edibles, and I know what they are. And I'm harvesting, my black trumpets, I'm harvesting my king boletes, I'm harvesting my chanterelles, and I truly know that that's what it is. And the main reason I do that is because I don't want dirt in my bag, not so much that I'm that I'm damaging the mycelium. Because like I said, we're talking about a couple threads of hyphae, attached, which is really not, a big deal. But just for the amateurs out there, it is important to pull the whole mushroom out of the ground, because there's some major identifying features that are in the ground, often on the stipe where it is attached to the mycelium. And so some mushrooms can be almost identical, but have different characteristics of the base of the stem, the base of the stipe. So for identification purposes, it actually can be important for people to actually pull the whole mushroom out of the ground.
Fascinating. Hey, thanks for that tip. That's something I haven't heard. So I know, obviously taking the mushroom and putting it on paper to get the fingerprint, if you will, of it is a really good technique. And there's great documentation, and in the resources page that we're working on for the co-op and for our community, we'll have a whole mushroom section where there's some great books and documentation out there as far as identification, local field journals, and field books, to the great work that Paul Stamets has done, and like we were mentioning with the fantastic fungi, and I'm sure, Levon, you know of a number of other resources too you might be able to share with us for people trying to learn more about this.
Yes, definitely. Well, of course, we have Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast now by Noah and Christian, which is the most comprehensive, Southern Oregon to the Bay Area documentation of just our bioregion. It's the first book that's come out for just the Redwood bioregion. So that's an incredible resource to have. And like you'll notice in your book that you showed us, Mike, of Mushrooms of the Pacific Northwest, all those mushrooms were ripped out of the ground. If you look at the site at the base of the stem, so because you need that to ID. So any mycologist walking in the woods would rip the whole mushroom out of the ground.
Very cool. Yeah, and it's funny. One thing that I'm really into now is no dig, as far as on my property for the raised beds that I do, and everything in my property now. It's a major trend in home gardening and farming, even small production farming, is no dig, and that's because of the mycelium network. And we're finding that the traditional way of gardening, where you till the soil and rip everything up and turn the soil. Charles Dowding, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's kind of a huge no dig proponent out of the UK. I love his YouTube channel. It's a really great educational channel, and he's been doing these tests with no dig versus traditional turned over beds with the amendments and stuff, and finding that no dig gets bigger yield, healthier plants, and has way less work. So it's just like going back to nature and understanding that's like less is more many times. And one other question, I just was planting some bare root nut and fruit trees a couple years old. I got from a great nursery here in Brookings, and the fellow there who knows a lot was saying actually to, I was asking him, it's kind of like the debate, do you prune or not prune these young trees? And he was saying not to prune these because the network with the mycelium actually talks to these branches and actually informs the tree on how to grow in the future. And if you're pruning too soon, then that can infect, and actually kind of get in the way between that whole network. So really interesting how people are figuring this all out right now.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm definitely not a master fruit tree pruner. We have some of those in our permaculture guild that are much more adept than I am. But yeah, generally speaking, I'm usually letting the young fruit trees kind of establish themselves in the root zone and vertically, above ground, and then kind of deciding what shape you want it. General schools of thought, where do you, is it a dwarf, is it a semi-dwarf, is it a standard fruit tree, when do you want it sort of to branch out, and what's your general goal of being able to harvest, or height of the tree, or structure.
It's interesting when you take like a scion from like an elderberry or something, right? You just stick it in the ground. Yes. Wondering what that interaction is with the mycelium network there. Seems like that would make a lot of sense in terms of growth there for something like that. It's just, nature is just so fascinating how that works.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, there's a lot of research that still needs to be done, but what's fun is just you can do it, you guys, for those listening and watching, you can just go do this yourself. That's what's so great about it, is you can be empowering yourself to get involved in your own backyard, going back to mycorestoration, fixing your own property with these kind of things, experimenting yourself, and really discovering a lot of this. And one thing that I love about the hive mind concepts of new internet technologies, blockchain, et cetera, as we're developing infrastructure so that we can, as a global community working locally, get this information into databases and stuff so that scientists and those who are more specialists can take this data. And I know there are different agencies and different local groups and stuff that are creating means to collect data. And so that's more information and the resources that we'd like to get out there. But essentially what's empowering is everybody who has some property can go out and experiment and do this themselves.
Definitely. And mentioning, the remediation and the impacts that we have on our environment. I mean, everything from the nitrates coming off my ducts to the manures coming off farms. There was a study that they did at the university here of looking at this small little organic farm, and it's just a few acres, but the coliform levels coming off this farm were 4 or 5 times the state allowable levels of coliforms and bacteria. And this is like 4 goats, 2 geese, and a bunch of manure. I mean, this isn't even the large scale agriculture that we have, and this wasn't even commercial fertilizers. This was manures, and so we need to use these fungal allies and plants and to our advantage. We can create things like bioswales. We can create things like catchments and wood chip mulches that can allow the biology to take place before we just flush these nutrients out to the ocean. Yes. Once things reach the hydrological system, and specifically our rivers and our oceans, it's so much harder to deal with these pollutants and these extreme nutrient levels that are destroying, large areas of wetlands and oceans and rivers. We have some of the most polluted rivers in all of California, right here in Humboldt County. And it's specifically bacterial coliform, E. coli levels, and it's primarily from farms, and the second source is all the septic tanks, but a lot of it's the runoff from agriculture and from animal husbandry. And mycology can help with this. Like mycelium will break these nutrients down, and that's what we're looking at even in cities with permeable parking lots, sidewalk swales with native plants and wood chips. Even though that these aren't specifically inoculated with different fungal species, they're naturally occurring in there. Yep. And it's just slowing the process of somebody's dripping oil pan, somebody's cigarette butt, somebody spilling some paint in their yard. It's slowing the process of this just flushing out into our streams and
it makes so much sense. The concrete jungle, in a traditional suburbia, where you have a spilled fuel or something, it goes down your driveway into the gutter, into the, imagine if you had these swales or you had all those sidewalks were wood chipped. There's a great guy, I've shared it before. He's in Arizona who has introduced this into entire neighborhoods. He's pretty famous now, done TED Talks and stuff, where he does the swales, and he's bringing back literally vegetation back to the desert by doing this simple rain catchment with these swales and stuff, and literally cutting the gutters out and creating these new ecosystems where you have these neighborhoods that were before all barren suburbia and now have edible plants everywhere, and it's lush, and it's the middle of the Arizona desert where the river was dry, and now the river's coming back. Permaculture. We're talking about permaculture here, of course. So the idea of like you have a diesel spill in your backyard, go get some wood chips. So for instance, in my property that we purchased, we had your traditional orchard in the front that was all grass with a couple fruit trees, and so what I've done is I've gone and I've sourced wood chips up in the mountains here from cuttings from the Forest Service. Mm-hmm. And I've done the 6 to 8 inches of mulching the wood chips across the entire, it's about 1/8 of an acre orchard. And now just within 4 or 5 months, you dig those wood chips back and you're seeing the grasses all. Well, I also did a kind of a sheet mulch concept with contractor paper. Mm-hmm. Then I did the wood chips on top to really get that grass killed. And now you're already seeing the mycelium appearing and the worms and everything. So imagine taking that idea to the suburbs where you have wood chip, organic wood chip services that come and they will sheet mulch, or they'll mulch a spill of diesel fuel on your grass or something. And instead of that just sitting there and leaching into the groundwater, you now have the mycelium networks growing, and you now then have a more healthy topsoil where you can then grow fruit trees or whatever you want in there. I mean, these are not complicated ideas. This is really simple stuff. Yeah. And it's super empowering because anybody can do it. Like I literally got all those wood chips for free. It's just labor. It was just, and there's even, you can call your local tree cutting companies and they'll come drop off wood chips because they're looking to get rid of it. Be careful there because you don't know where they're getting all these trees cuttings from and stuff. It could be non-organic and stuff, but with a little bit of might, a little bit of savvy, a little bit of knowledge, doesn't take much to really start fixing this world.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I'm working with a couple grad students, and they're looking at setting up like a bioswale for maybe that farm that research was looked at, or somebody else that's a landowner that's wanting to implement this. But we want to set up a live example that we can monitor and we can promote here in Humboldt County and in Northern California, and show people that they can mitigate these problems. We're seeing now that the Water Quality Board is starting to really crack down, and as these environmental concerns become more predominant in our society, and as disposal costs at dumps go up and pollution regulations get more and more strict, people are confronted with these issues of, am I going to shut down my dairy farm, or is there other, ecological techniques that I could use to filter this water out before it reaches the bay? We have a huge, oyster, fresh oyster, production in our bay here, millions and millions of dollars. And so finding these industries that are confronted with these environmental issues and looking for solutions is a great way for people to bridge that gap between, industry and the environment.
Very exciting. If you guys are looking to start a business, be an entrepreneur, hey, not a bad idea to get into this. It's exciting stuff. Hey, man, this has been an amazing conversation. Any final thoughts or words, Bear or Levon, on this? Anything we missed we want to cover?
Bear?
No, I think we've covered quite a bit. There's a lot of areas I'd really like to pick your brain about, and maybe we'll have you back for a second time. But thanks so much for this, and yeah, it's been great and so timely. And I think the world events and everything that we're seeing, unfold right before us now are really leading people in this direction, whether they know it or not, or whether they like it or not, because it really is the solution for everything that, every problem we have right now.
Yeah, thanks, Mike and Bear, for having me on. And just to reiterate what you said, Mike, so much of these technologies are so accessible, whether it's, growing your own food or healing the landscape. That's what got me so excited specifically about, cultivating mushrooms and mycoremediation and growing your own medicine. It really is, approachable for the average person to go out and make that change in their community and on their landscape and their watershed. So yeah, just kind of that's kind of my goal, with what we provide, is just making it approachable for folks that there's so much you can do yourself, like you mentioned, Mike.
And it's also a lot of fun too, getting the kids out there and seeing, the fruits of your labor, literally, no pun intended.
Right.
And growing your own medicine and all that. It's more important than ever with what we're seeing going on. So nature, Mother Nature, Mother Gaia, she tells us, she'll kick us in the ass every now and then and tell us what's up. And I think that's what's happening right now. It's like, wake up, time to wake up and smell the roses and start taking a little bit more responsibility for yourself. And it doesn't matter if you live in a high rise or if you are on 20 acres out in the country. We can all do our part in terms of learning more and taking these techniques to our life. There are those in the city who are planting trees. Simple as that. There's so many things that can be done, and the Great Awakening is happening, and that's what's so exciting. And people like you, Levon, that are out there doing these workshops and spreading the knowledge of this stuff is very inspirational. So we appreciate you and thank you for coming on today.
Thanks, guys.
For those that listening on the podcast, you can join us every week. Actually, we do this as a live stream on dlive.tv/Alfa Vedic. And that's at 10 in the morning Pacific Standard Time on Thursdays. It's a great platform where you can jump in. You can actually earn crypto for commenting, and you can tip us in crypto if you enjoy this content. You can also, of course, if you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe, like, and comment. That really helps us spread this information with the algorithm. So please subscribe to us on YouTube. It's just youtube.com/Alfa Vedic. That's where this podcast will live visually. And then, of course, you can find us where any podcasts are, iTunes, Google Podcasts, etc. So you can also go to alfavedic.com and see everything we're up to there. We have a new site coming out that's really going to highlight everything we're doing on our farm in terms of our herbs we're growing and the products we're creating. And of course, as I mentioned before, our Telegram group too is t.me/Alfa Vedic. That's where you can join us every day. That's the general conversation we have going with the community. So jump onto Telegram, t.me/Alfa Vedic. We have a very vibrant community. Love you guys. Really pushing knowledge out there and testing kind of the boundaries of reality in that group. And then last, our Patreon. If you really want to support us, besides going to our website and buying the products, you can go to our patreon.com/Alfa Vedic. And we're going to jump on there right now with Levon, and he's going to give us a little information on how to grow our own reishi mushrooms. So thanks, everybody. Have a blessed, wonderful day. Get out there and grow something. Cheers.
Cheers.